I will briefly give you a brief introduction on clinical trials, and then we'll get into a discussion. So there are four phases of a clinical trial. Is everyone aware of the four phases of a clinical trial? Is anyone not aware of the four phases of clinical trial? Yes, so the first phase is just safety. So this is usually in healthy volunteers. Is this drug going to kill you or not? They just inject it into healthy volunteers just to see whether or not it is safe. A phase 2 is effectiveness and side effects. So this is usually the first time that's put into bladder cancer patients. Less than 100 patients, at this stage, it's usually just bladder cancer patients, maybe not a control group. And then I'm sure you've all heard the phrase phase 3 clinical trial. So this is what people get really excited about because this is really when it shows when it works or not. So if you're at a clinic, if you're at a conference and they're saying, oh, we're going to show you the results of a phase 3 clinical trial in bladder cancer, this is when people get excited because this generally shows whether or not it works. So there's hundreds of people and you're randomized, you flip a coin, one group gets the new treatment, one group gets the old treatment. Phase 4, you might not have heard about. That is once it's already in the market, it's available, it's being given to people, and they're still monitoring it. So those are your four phases of clinical trials. The World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition did a survey and asked people around the world, bladder cancer patients, were you offered a clinical trial during your treatment? And we saw here that 84% of people were not offered a clinical trial. That this was because 19% were not eligible. A lot of people, 5% of people had a fear of receiving a placebo. 5 people had a fear of possible side effects. The 5% of people said that the trial was too far away, and 5% had concerns that the bladder cancer would not, that the trial would not help their bladder cancer. And it was urologists and oncologists that were speaking to people about their bladder cancer clinical trial. And though we did see people with metastatic and advanced cancers were more likely to be offered a trial, because that is generally, we see a lot more clinical trials happening for people with metastatic bladder cancer. So thank you all of you in the room and online who completed that survey and helped us generate that data. So today we are speaking about clinical trials and challenges and opportunities of how patients can get involved. So the Patient Engagement Management Suite has suggested 7 criteria for what is a good way of making sure that patient groups are involved in clinical trials. So shared purpose, make sure that the patient organization and your organization have the same goals. Have accessibility as well, so make sure that all of the documents that you are producing can be understood by the patient organization. We'll just go through a couple more here as well. Transparency. Make sure that you're communicating internally and externally, that everyone knows what you're talking about. And continuity and sustainability. Make sure that all the lessons that you've learned and all the mistakes that you've made collaborating together on this clinical trial, share those, and then make sure that everything that you have learned is available in the future. So how can patient organizations help? So how can we in the room help researchers do clinical trials? We can talk about patient preferences. What is the most important thing to patients at the different stages of their cancer journey? Patient-reported outcomes. What are the most pertinent patient-reported outcomes as well? So what are patients looking for when you're asking them about quality of life? And clinical trial recruitment as well. Let's look at the design of the clinical trial and let's see what it is that will help you recruit. Are you going to reimburse parking, for example? Little things like that can really help boost recruitment. So that is a little overview of that. I will go all the way back so you can see our names again. Yes, and so now it's time for discussion. I will ask Michelle Colero first. Could you just give us a little bit of an overview about about clinical trials from your perspective? Yes, so the magic people at the back switch on and off the microphone.
at the
Yes,
back.
so there's some very talented people at the back who
Okay.
switch them on and off.
So I see smiling from the magic people in the back, so I'm assuming everyone can hear me. Thank you, magic people. So at Bladder Cancer Canada, we have taken quite an active role in clinical trials for the last few years. Before, in just a smidgen about our history, we were started by 2 bladder cancer patients who literally went door to door to meet with and expand our programs and services and get the word out. So I feel that now in the last 4 or 5 years, we've really come forward and have been more interactive and active within the clinical trial space. Also, we have an amazing medical advisory board, and those are often PIs or principal investigators in many, if not most, of the clinical trials that we are involved in. And they also are crucial in giving a nudge to patients that say, you know what, there's a clinical trial coming out, you may or may not be eligible, but let's talk about it. And the one that I always use as an example, Tony, some of you may or may not have met him over the years. He was diagnosed with bladder cancer almost, gosh, now it's been 4 years, almost 5 years ago. And he was given months to live. I can't even imagine what that would be like. And he has a wife and 2 beautiful daughters. And he just said, no, I'm 45. No way, Jose. And his doctor, one of our medical advisory board members, said, you know what, this is a long shot, but why don't you get involved in this clinical trial? 5 years go by. He, on Friday, had his 100th treatment. He is cancer-free, happy, and just thriving, off from one little, hey, maybe there's some value in this clinical trial. And now he walks every day. He's got a new puppy. Like he is the epitome of why clinical trials need patient involvement, not only for the patient's sake, but how many lives has his feedback and his participation has saved going forward.
Okay, sorry. It was physically switched off, so it was on me. Um, can you talk about your experience? What is it actually like to run a clinical trial?
Well, I think one of the comments she made is that when you offer to patients, say, look, this is the reality, what it's going to be, and now we have this trial, it's another trial, or that you can run, and looks promising, and so on. Of course, these patients are really happy to be involved, and of course, you have to explain what might happen with this treatment and so on. So you have to take your time and the patient as well. Explain correctly and adequately, but these patients are the ones that may benefit more, of course.
And Michelle Hull, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about your experience with clinical trials and how you're involved in them?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Hull. I work in global medical affairs oncology at J&J. First, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and I'm so happy to have another Michelle on the panel. That's always fun. But it's been a really amazing day listening to all of the talks and getting to introduce myself to some of you and hear your stories. My job at J&J is in medical affairs, which is the last 2 pieces of the 4 stages of clinical trials. So the R&D team runs all of the trials that test the safety and efficacy. And in medical affairs, once we get a phase 3 trial, we work on making sure that that data gets disseminated and people understand about that therapy. But we also strategically try to think about what other types of trials we need to do. So we're not focused on the approval, but we're focused on the reimbursement. We're focused on other types of data that would make providers feel more comfortable prescribing the drug. We look at side effects. So we run trials, and it's very important in those trials specifically that we have patient perspective in developing those trials, but also in what other types of data patients would like to see. And so I think I have one of the best jobs at J&J because my role is really to bring patients into those conversations, into the work that we do, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in this session.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle Hull. Michelle Colero, how can we make sure that the clinical trials going forward are actually the clinical trials that patients need?
It's, first of all, educating patients on the benefits of a clinical trial, and it's ensuring that they know their participation is very impactful. And I think one of the ways to do that is more education and explaining in different formats and different vehicles, for visual learners and even various different languages. How is it that their participation is valuable? And then do that with surveys, making sure that they want to be involved. How would they be involved? And we have a great partnership with Queen's Cancer Research Institute in Canada. And they now, even in deciding how to run a clinical trial, patients are being asked, what do you want to get out of it? And how can I get involved? So it's really taking the patient perspective from the very beginning, even from the design of what the clinical trial would look like.
Thank you. And Professor Palou, perhaps you can give us the name of a clinical trial that you were personally very proud of and how it felt then to see it presented at an international congress.
Okay, well, in which clinical trial? Well, my first clinical trial was in BCG. It was at the period that Donald Lamb showed that BCG is 6+3. We make an schema of 6+6.
So 6+3 is 6 induction and then 3 maintenance.
3 maintenance, 3 maintenance, intravesical BCG. And at that time, we published the 6+6 that we said was not useful because it was an overdose and because also it said, and here is important, the selection criteria of the patient. In our trial, we continue with more BCG in those patients with tumor at 6 months. If there was no tumor, we didn't give more BCG, and there was no such a real advantage. And it was a great discussion at that time.
And how did you feel when you saw it published and presented?
Oh, great. I mean, we, as a doctors, we spend lots of hours to first knowing a little bit about the topic, then preparing and thinking about possible good trials, possible new possibilities to offer to our patients, how to improve and things. And then you have to write it, not only to think it, to write it, then to have some sponsorship, to get some money, then to be approved by your hospital or different hospitals, multi-center trials. So, wow, and finally after 2, 3, 5, 10 years, it is published. Wow, it's one of your babies, you say, no? And it's nice. I mean, and it's finally, it's useful because it's not always useful. I mean, when we just thinking and trying to improve our things, sometimes things that you say, wow, was not useful. So, okay, let's go in another direction. And this happens, but it is the way, this is what, no, the phrase I put from our friend Einstein said, have to try and move and change otherwise. But not always is successful, but there we are. Yeah.
Okay, now it's working. Thank you. I'm sorry, there's so many different speakers. You're switching all the switches. What are the opportunities for patients, advocates, and care partners to collaborate with Johnson & Johnson in your oncology research?
Yeah, so I like to tell this story about how before COVID, I have a really great boss, and I said to him, we need to be doing a lot more with patients. And he said, we're J&J, we work with patients all the time. Why don't you go out and see what we're doing with patients? And I did, and we had a lot of opportunities for patients to come and tell their stories. and give us quotes. And I said, that's not what I'm talking about. I'd love to work with patients, and why aren't they in the meetings that we're having where we're thinking through these really important things? And so he gave me the space, created this role for me to bring patients into J&J. And I'll tell you some of the examples of things that have been impactful by having a patient voice. And we have a lot of work to do in bladder. We've had a lot more success so far in lung, but looking forward to doing more in bladder as well. We had a lung cancer patient who helped us look at one of our trials and gave us the perspective from being an active, patient managing active disease. She actually influenced a secondary endpoint, and she gave us some really simple suggestions that I really think we had like a massive blind spot on. Things like, we've got this cream that is helping to treat some of the side effects that can be anticipated. We talked to the best dermatologists in the world. We got the best cream. But she said, how much is that cream? What's it going to cost patients? And how much will you need? And so out of that, a very simple intervention was just to create alternatives at different price points for a cream that would have a similar effect. She also said, you guys are managing side effects, adverse events, grade 3 and 4, but you're not looking at how long the duration of those side effects are. And that's the secondary endpoint that we put into our study. So always well-intentioned, we're trying to think through how to develop the studies, but without talking to someone who's living those side effects, who's managing the active disease. I think there are opportunities where we will, innocently overlook very important things.
Yes, thank you. I apologize. Michelle Colero, education. Can you talk to me about education and clinical trials, please?
I thought they were magic makers back then. They're tired. It's been a long day. So yes, education really, we find, has been successful from peer to peer. So there's nothing like speaking to someone who has, for example, non-muscle invasive bladder cancer, had what we call a turbot, and then have a neobladder, and finding out what is that like and how to get involved that way. So we find peer-to-peer is one way to educate people, to say, hey, I was also part of a clinical trial, which is why, for example, in Tony's case, he is still alive and thriving. We also do step-by-step guides, and we do a lot of webinars. So webinars, and anyone's welcome to join a webinar, talks about what is a clinical trial. And like you said, going through 4 steps. If patients hear clinical trial, I've been told, oh, I feel like a guinea pig, or I'm just one person, that won't make a big deal. Oh, no one wants to listen to my challenges or whatnot. So it's that step-by-step guide. This is what to expect. Here's certain peers that you can speak to with similar situations that are in the same boat. Here's the principal investigator. We have one of our doctors who has actually talked to 2 patients of hers and said, you know what, you would really value, and you really need to think about it. So I think education takes many forms. And like I said before, languages, visual ways to share it, and just getting it out. And every newsletter that we have, we do monthly newsletters to about 35,000 people. In every edition of our newsletter, we talk about a clinical trial and do you wish to be involved? Sometimes it's our own trial that we're doing in terms of the programs and services that we're offering. But more often than not, the section in our monthly newsletter is, here's a clinical trial. We need patients with experience in X or Belversa, erdafitinib, or whatever the clinical trial might be as well.
Thank you. Professor Palou, could you talk about challenges that you had in running a clinical trial and a solution that you found to get over that challenge, whether it was education or enrollment or approval? What are some of your tips?
Well, there is one word for this: resilience. So you have to be very patient. No, because I think I could say in my life I had different problems at different stages. For the trial being approved, for the trial being sponsored, for the also then problems with data manager, with this, with that. And I think it's a continuous process that you improve the data managers, improve the acceptance, they improve the ethical committee, the relation with the ethical committee. It's important. I think in life, it's important to have a good relation with everybody around you, because then things go better. And this is also for the studies. I mean, because I remember that at the beginning, the dynamics with the ethical committee was not good. Oh, you send me the trial and I don't know the trial. So, well, okay. So then what we do now, we receive a trial, we go through the ethical committee. Before sending it to them, we talk to them, we explain the trial, they understand the need of this trial and everything, and then is easily accepted, or it's not so many questions arguing and so on. So if they know better where we are going, the objectives of the trial, and the urologist or urologist or an oncologist, then they do better. So, and I think there are always different steps on how to solve when there is an adverse event with all these new drugs. We have also very good relation with the oncologist and the nurses in oncology, call the patients every week and so on. And so we have to start. So it's multiple steps that, well, it's daily life. I mean, daily life, you want to do trials. If you want to do trials, these are all different aspects that you have to take care of.
Thank you. I think everyone in this room certainly has a lot of resilience and persistence. Michelle Hull, can you give me some more examples about how patients are being included in your efforts within Johnson & Johnson Oncology?
Yeah, so definitely we're including patients in helping us design the trials, but I think beyond that, we're really trying to have patients included in all of the work that we're doing, thinking through what kinds of data would be important to patients. And because we want to include patients and have them sitting at the table, not just with HCPs and ourselves, but include patients in those conversations, we are thinking about the language that we use, realizing that it's very technical in a lot of aspects, realizing that it might be somewhat insensitive to patients. So we've worked with the World Bladder Cancer Patient Coalition with Alex and Lydia to develop a guide that we can use internally, so that when we are including patients in our conversations, we're mindful that instead of saying hematuria, we're saying blood in the urine. Not that all patients don't understand all of the technical words, but we're sensitive to the fact that patients shouldn't have to learn our language, right? We can take a step down. So we actually have a patient author who's going to submit that either to AUA or EAU. We're not sure who that is. We have several authors who will be included that are patients and advocates. So that's one example. We're also
what is AUA and EAU?
Oh, sorry, American Urological Association and European Urological Association. So these are the major congresses where we present our data. And I think it's amazing and incredible that patients are coming to these congresses and hearing what some of the results are, and really taking an active participation in what new treatments are available. So that's been amazing to see that these congresses are becoming more and more inclusive of patients themselves. I think we met at a booth at EAU at some point. So it's great to see patients being, featured in some of these congresses that have been scientifically focused. The other thing that we're doing is including patients in the discussions that we're having with healthcare providers. So things like just thinking through our strategy. What is it that if you were, wanting to take this treatment or you were considering this treatment, what kind of data would make you feel more comfortable? Is it something we're not thinking about? Is it something we need to consider? And we're also, finding opportunities for patients to publish data with us and be considered as authors. So, and we're treating them really as, my opinion, they are the experts. They are the people living with the disease, experiencing the side effects. And as such, they're being treated at J&J as experts alongside, of course, the HCPs. And it's great to see them working together.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, it's me again. I'll stand up so you can see me. So I support patients at all different points of going into a trial. So encouraging them to go into trials and explaining that it's not just for end of life and so on, but sometimes it is for end of life people. So I'm wondering how to address it's not, I don't know whether to call it a problem, but some of these patients now are doing so well on the immunotherapies, really amazingly. And it's so encouraging for all of us to see that. But I also have to support them in the fact that what happens when they come to the end of their trial and it stops? What then? Because, people think, okay, so I'm just here for the trial now and I've got my life back and I want to live now, but I know that it's going to end. And then what happens to me? So this is a situation that I'm in, trying to support people at the moment and explain to them. So yes, whoever wants to answer, really.
So there are post-trial access plans for patients who are doing well on therapy beyond the trial. So I'm assuming that's a question that a patient has before they enter the trial, or?
So yes, it is. And also during, and also speaking to a wife of somebody who the medication stopped for them after this immunotherapy stopped and they died. Now, I was told when I asked advice that I should tell them they was most likely to anyway. So
I hope that wasn't one of our studies.
well,
I don't
I'm not
think that,
going to say what drug it was.
I don't think that's a normal
But
point of
these
communication
are
for
the
clinical trials.
the patients. It's usually the families of the patient that have these kind of worries. They feel that if the person that they care for and love is doing really, really well, then how do they go about things afterwards? Are they going to be supported, or what happens to them?
So I would say that we have a whole team that works on post-trial access. So for patients who are doing well on therapy and need to continue on therapy, we do provide access to the drug after the trial, right? The trial is to get the data that we need. It's not to disregard the patients, right? We definitely want to continue to take care of the patients. Even I mentioned earlier, the other half of my job is pre-approval access. We find ways for patients once those pre-approval access programs stop so that they stay on treatment. That's our ethical obligation. And I think the clinicians would agree.
Yeah. We talk with our oncologist, and mainly all the systemic treatment is given by our oncologist in our center. We take care of all the trials in non-muscle invasive bladder cancer, and then together with the oncologist, the ones in muscle invasive versus metastatic disease. But normally the treatment in some of these trials, I don't know if not all of them, but the majority, the patients who respond might continue with the treatment.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are some immunotherapies. So these are the PD-L1 checkpoint inhibitors that you talk about that end in MAB. Some of these do have a 2-year stopping rule. So that the rule is you get it for 2 years and then you don't get it anymore. And the thinking is because it is boosting the immune system, that after 2 years the effect will continue. And this is also, interestingly, it's also linked to the health technology assessment that we spoke to earlier, because if all of the countries know that this treatment will be given for a maximum of 2 years, then it's much easier for them to do their economic calculations. But if you're talking about targeted therapies or antibody drug conjugates, those are given continuously, and yet they would be given to the person for the rest of their life. When, the clinical trial will never really end for those people.
Thank you. That's really good to hear, because it's really encouraging, not just for the people who are on these medications, but for all the people like on forums and things, for example, that are watching that. And the treatments that are coming through now are really changing people's lives for the better. They really are, it's like without a doubt, for those people that respond.
Yeah, we do have a lot of conversations around trials lasting way longer than we had expected, right? It's not something that we can't stop it, right? So we do take care of the patients, but I want to make sure that you have a comment on that.
So I like in my country, you wouldn't get ethics approval for that trial
Right.
if there wasn't that plan.
Right.
They wouldn't approve the trial to run if there wasn't that plan to help the patients afterwards. What might have happened is that the patient failed on the treatment, and that's why they stopped. And then the patient, correct. Yeah. So, but generally the ethics approval is given on that agreement that anyone who is, and sometimes even if they fail on that, they will put them on the original treatment. So if, in other words, if the treatment isn't working and or they haven't had the outcome that they wanted, they would put them back onto that for as long. And that's how it works with us.
Yeah, and what I would say is if you do have patients that have that concern, they should always talk to the company. There's always a representative in the clinical trial operations group or the team that would answer that question for that family member. You should definitely get support in that if there's a perception that they were sort of leveraged for a trial and left with no options.
We have a question also from the online participants, and this comes from one of our member organizations in Malawi. So it's a little bit focused more on the research and bringing research into this region. So they say, my observation is that Africa and Malawi in particular has less or no opportunities when it comes to bladder cancer clinical trials. How would this opportunity trickle down to my country and in research and more clinical trials that could prove more relevance to them? The key challenge in Malawi has been lack of research and documentation of such data. And this platform should be a stepping stone towards unearthing more opportunities in research and documentation of bladder cancer research and experiences, I suppose, as well as dissemination to enhance knowledge and policy influence in Malawi. So I know you probably don't have direct experience in Malawi specifically, but I wonder if you have any thoughts, Michelle or Dr. Palou, on what are some of the barriers to bringing that research to these countries in low resource settings, and what can we do collectively more as a community to make that happen?
I can start. Yeah, no, that's a great observation. I will say that I'm going to my first meeting next year in Ghana, so not Malawi, but we're getting closer. And it is part of my role at J&J to make sure that our research not only is diverse in terms of cultures and where we're getting participation, but also marginalized patient populations, which would include patients who live in rural communities who maybe don't have access to clinical trials. So it is something that we're trying to work on. I'm happy to connect with this advocate from Malawi to see if there is an opportunity for us to do more in his community. But yeah, overall, I think the infrastructure for clinical trials is probably something you can comment on.
Yeah, I think mainly the problem in these countries, where I was talking more with a lady from Angola, that the problem is that it's a population of, I don't know, in a country of 5 million people or 40 million people, and they have 40 urologists and 10 oncologists. So this is the infrastructure, there's a lack of a specialist, a lack of infrastructure, a lack of methodology, a lack of also the patient's follow-up. Sometimes the patients come and then walking, coming by bus or from 100 kilometers to get the treatment, and they go back somewhere and they are lost. So I think these are local, global infrastructure problems that, of course, I think from industry to try, I don't know, maybe to talk about doing clinical trials, but to give some support to the country in different aspects in order to improve the well-being of the patients, or some of them being treated or facilitate, but really to have an infrastructure and then a good methodology, and also that the patients will follow the treatment, will follow all the controls that have to be done in a good trial. It's part of the difficulties, no, to do a trial in those countries.
Yeah, and I would say it has to be a partnership. So kind of having the context of someone in Malawi who can help us understand what some of the barriers are is a big piece of it. But we are working with UICC, which is trying to put a framework in for, I don't remember the acronym.
Union for International.
Thank you. It's been a long day. So they are trying to put a framework in for lower middle income countries, and we're trying to do a partnership with them. So I think it takes, a collaboration across many different groups to try and reach some of these areas where trials haven't been accessible for patients, but it is something that we are trying to figure out, right? And I think with technology, we're looking into ways that we could do trials that don't require so many visits to a site, but that would require, of course, internet, solid internet capabilities. And we're trying to find ways, innovative ways to do it.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on that, because I live in a country where can you hear? Okay. Where we have some of the highest levels of compliance when it comes to clinical trials in HIV, TB, and that. In fact, the COVID, we ran one of the biggest trials in the world. Yeah, one of the biggest trials in the world on the COVID vaccine. Every single one of our healthcare practitioners were on that trial. I think we looked at something like 53,000 people out of just our country. And most of those people were compliant.
And that was I'm not saying compliance, I'm saying the willingness. That was a provider who brought that trial to us.
Correct.
Brought that trial design to us and asked us to run it, right?
So I think that with enough partnership and enough resources and enough investment, it's available. I don't think we can put it to the patients and say, that you lose the patients and so on, because you must remember, and I'm not having a thing, but you must remember is that patient is as aware of their life as a patient in America. He has as many children, he has as many things. He knows that that's his only option for treatment. Sometimes it's like his only option, otherwise he's sent home with morphine to die. So I think that sometimes the stakes are actually higher because he doesn't have a choice on that. And we've seen it with TB and HIV, where South Africa is one of the hubs on that. And it was merely because there was that. And we have compliance, we have compliant people because of that, because that's been built into the thing. So I think that, 2/3 of the people that should be, and I'm not saying are diagnosed, I said should be diagnosed with bladder cancer, live in low to middle income countries. And we're sitting with the majority of the research being done in countries where the majority of the people who should be diagnosed aren't being diagnosed. And I look at South Africa again, in the Northern Cape. There was 1 point on colon cancer. There's one family that runs a mutation gene in the entire world on that helped them understand a thing. Now, that's what I'm saying is you're losing all those opportunities to understand the disease. Earlier today, someone asked us and said, why do I get this disease? Well, maybe reason is sitting in the 2/3 of people that you're not trialing. And I have to say, you know, the question of it being that those doctors, even though there are 14 doctors in that country, they service that country. So for him to run a trial, he's used to those amounts. A doctor who is sitting in another scenario and another resource is not used to servicing those many patients. So you have to look at the context of it and say, am I able to do this? And I think we need to put more work into that.
I think that's completely fair. I think you're talking about Sasanki trial, and we had one in Brazil that was similar to Kitaba during COVID. Those were those were providers that came to us and wanted to do that partnership. So I think to the extent that we can find the providers who are willing to run the trials, we would be, glad to do that.
Yeah, but I think one thing is to make global comments about the different countries or situations, and clear is more difficult. But if there is investigator-initiated trial, then it's a completely different story, and it's a completely different how to say in English, motivation from the doctors to do it. So there are different models here, different ways, but globally speaking, it's more difficult, no doubt. But of course, if there are stimulated people or people that are more methodologically incentivized or more knowledgeable, of course, then wherever are in the world, you can do a very good trial. But this has to be all together, I think.
Are there any further questions? I might ask everyone then for their closing statements. So Michelle Colero, closing statement.
Closing statement. Thank you for inviting me and for allowing me to speak. But also, I just want to remind folks that sometimes, just on the back of that conversation, that sometimes we need to go to each individual center. I live in a very rural community in Canada, and we have one urologist. That's it. And I just go to his office. I make an appointment. I go to his office and I remind him about the programs that we have. And sometimes it takes one person. So for some organizations that think, oh my gosh, this is daunting, we started with very few patients involved. And then we asked them to refer one person, just tell one person about anything with respect to clinical trials, anything at all. And then so on and so forth. It's a 1970s reference to a commercial. You tell one friend, and they'll tell one friend, and they'll tell one friend. And honestly, that's how we started as an organization. And that's how we continue today, one at a time. And that everyone feels they had a voice and that they're heard every day, every time.
My comments would be, after such good experts here, I'm just a simple urologist, that we are happy really to work on these new trials. I've been practicing urology only for 40 years. And I've gone from open surgery to all my patients to ureteroscopy, laparoscopy, robotic surgery, no treatment, BCG, new drugs. So I think it's a privilege of what I've been having a look in all these years in uro-oncology, the evolution. And I hope a few more years, not too many more. I've been working hard too many years, but a few more years to still collaborate and have all these trials of these ideas. I have now very young and active colleagues in my center taking care of all the trials and all the stuff, and just now just overlooking a little bit what are they doing, and that's it. And then it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to see that how things are evolving. And now, as I said, we are in the robotic fever period. We are in the UMAP fever period. We are now a lot of fevers around bladder cancer, and I'm really happy. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you again for having me. It's been a wonderful day. I want to say that I recognize that a lot of the research and a lot of the advocacy work has been focused in the US and to some extent EMEA. And that's why I'm here today. I'm so happy to meet people that I have not come across. Oh, sorry, Europe. EMEA is Europe. And I truly would look forward to, working with any of the advocacy groups that are interested in getting more involved in research, sharing that patient perspective. I have so much respect and admiration for the patients who are in this room and the caregivers, to give your time and energy to kind of learning about this and helping us, work towards better solutions. I think it's amazing. So just, yeah, I look forward to meeting more of you, I hope, at the reception, and thank you for a great day.
Thank you. Yes, so thank you to all of our speakers.